Welcome to Primary Purpose Big Book Study for All's first podcast. Tonight we have Tina Ann from Idaho and Oregon. Tina is one of the founders of our group and she's got a fascinating story. Tina, take it away.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, I'm going to start with the set aside prayer. God, help me set aside everything I think I know about you, everything I think I know about others, everything I think I know about myself, and everything I think I know about my own recovery. For a new experience with you, God, a new experience with others, a new experience within myself, and a much needed new experience in my own recovery. I'm a recovered codependent, including a love addict, Al-Anon, and COSA. My home group is the Sunday and Wednesday Big Book Meeting for All. You can find our virtual recovery community at primarypurposebigbookstudy.com. All are welcome. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics and thankfully love addicts and codependents have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men and women, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begins to dominate them. That's from page 85 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm ugly, I'm less than, I'm alone, I'm an object. These are the old ideas I picked up in my youth. Every person's fifth step I've had the privilege to hear over the years has included a similar list. We are suffering and feel empty and desperately try to get something on the outside to make us feel okay on the inside, like trying to get liked, get loved, get attention, get approval, and so on. The Big Book of AA calls this the phenomena of craving. Recovered alcoholic Chuck Chamberlain, who lived at Laguna Beach, described it this way. If the entire bay here were full of alcohol, it would never be enough to satisfy the alcoholic. We can't get enough of something we really don't need. The 12-step program guides us to and keeps us connected with what we really need. And on page 128 in the Big Book, it says giving rather than getting will become the guiding principle. There had been pockets of give in my life, some contributing, helping, purpose, and love, like drill team, raising my kids, teaching exercise classes to senior citizens, and pockets of get, body and eating disorders, looking to get acceptance, graduating summa cum laude, looking to get approval and acceptance, promiscuity, looking to get loved, serial monogamy, looking to get loved and get security. This life of get became uncomfortable enough to lead me to seek help. I started counseling and then attended Codependents Anonymous. When my oldest started struggling, I transitioned to Al-Anon because there were no sponsors in CODA at that time. I got a sponsor who worked the 12 steps the way it had been passed down to her, using the Big Book of AA. In 1939, when the Big Book was written, the AAs and Al-Anons, families and friends, worked the steps side by side. They knew that we all had the same thinking problem, just different symptoms, as reflected on page 64. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. And also reflected on page 35. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously, this is the crux of the problem. I quickly worked steps 1 through 9 with her, and it transformed my relationships with all 3 of my children. When they became teens, I had to learn a different definition of love. This was my first spiritual awakening. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers and codependents depends on our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. Needs, not wants. My job wasn't to get anything from them. It was giving and loving for the sake of giving and loving. Not to make them happy, or to please them, or to arrange them to suit me, or to use them to make me look good, or to get liked, or even appreciated. Just loving them. To be the mother my higher power would have me be. They, like me, need a higher power of their own. Truly loving anyone means letting them find their own way and trusting they will. Sometimes that means I have to let those I care about accumulate misery, enough pain to want a different way of life. Letting others do this is part of real love. Misery is the first ingredient in the recipe of recovery for us all. During that time, I also met and fell in love with Bob. Our relationship was cut short because he got a brain tumor and died. Much later, I realized I'd taken Bob's death personally, like maybe I did something wrong or could have done something better to prevent his death. I've come to realize that Bob's life and death was between him and his higher power, and so is everyone's. Bob, like my children, was a separate person with his own higher power, and that was not me. I will be forever grateful to have had the opportunity to know and love Bob. My role as parent and the Fellowship of Al-Anon carried me through this loss. My first sponsor had only worked through step 9, so I had to get a new sponsor to continue. My new sponsor used Al-Anon literature. Over the course of the next 20 years, I went to 3 to 6 meetings each week, had 5 different sponsors, and worked the steps 5 times, was a group rep, literature coordinator, went to countless counselors, read countless books, tried every self-help program available, got EMDR, etc. I was also trying to sponsor others, but never successfully. I started to believe there was something wrong with me. I kept trying to fix my low self-esteem. The harder I tried, the worse it got. I had lost my brief period of solid ground. At that time, I was also going to open AA meetings. I loved those meetings. I heard something I needed, something which fed my soul there, but I didn't yet know what it was. I found myself wishing I was an alcoholic. I now know I wanted their solution, not their problem. Then came empty nesting. I felt like the hole in the donut. I met a man also empty nesting. We codependently enmeshed. We rushed to get involved and very quickly bought a home together. We were using each other to get security and love, the essence of love addiction and codependency. We were quickly miserable together. During that time, Dave realized he was an alcoholic and went to AA. Then he realized he was a sex addict and went to SAA. When he told me about a sex addiction, I fell off of an emotional cliff. However, looking back, I realize it made sense that I got involved with a sex addict. I had learned to treat myself like an object, and in doing so, treated all others like objects. He and I were the same. Of course we were. Everyone I know was raised to compete with others. Women usually around appearance, and men usually around success. Our culture demands it. All of it is objectification. We begin to lose ourselves and our true connection with others. We lose our way. When I was 16 years old, I went to a party, got drunk, passed out in the bedroom. I was awakened by being raped. I passed out again. When I awoke later, I was bleeding and the man was gone. I was the subject of intense gossip at school that year. I felt such shame. I was called a slut. I thought it was my fault. A couple months later, I spent the night with a friend. We snuck out and her boyfriend and his friend picked us up. I knew right away this was a bad idea. I didn't know this man, but he was all over me in the back seat on the way to Makeout Point. I kept pretending I was drinking my empty beer. He was mauling me. I told them I wanted to go home, but none of them listened. Finally, I said, "Let me out of the car. I'm walking home." It was more than 5 miles and dark. I started walking. I heard someone running up behind me. I was tackled. My chin hit the ground hard. He rolled me over and told me to spread my legs. I knew then this was the man who'd raped me. He was 6 years older than me. This time I was able to fight like hell and get free. I ran back to the car and yelled, "Either you take me home now, or you will be accomplices to a crime." They took me home. Someone capable of that has lost touch with their soul, their goodness, their higher power. Our competitive culture destroys connection. It's a progressive disease and can become dangerous. You can't simultaneously be an object and retain connection to self, others, or God. So connection has to go. Bill Wilson, one of the founders of AA, brought objectification, a symptom of sex addiction, into the big book on page 81. Probably alluding to himself, he wrote, "He commences to look around in the nightclubs, or their equivalent, for something besides liquor. Perhaps he is having a secret and exciting affair with the girl who understands." The girl who understands. An object. The founders didn't connect the dots that this is the selfishness they wrote about 12 pages earlier when they wrote regarding sex. We subject each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? Dave and I, like Bill Wilson, were using sex as a substitute for closeness and love instead of an expression of closeness and love. Of course we were. Everyone around us was. It was everywhere. But at the time, I made his behavior about me. I started snooping, prying, focusing on him so intensely that my life was going unlived and I was an empty shell. My codependency was like a raging fire consuming me. We both were going to lots of 12-step meetings. We started going to relationship counseling too, and that was the last straw. My pain was unbearable. The more we worked on our relationship, the worse it got. The more I worked on myself, the worse I got. I felt hollow. I became completely desperate. I didn't plan a way to kill myself, but wanted to die. Dave found his way to Sex Addicts Anonymous' primary purpose. He started getting better and didn't participate in our dysfunction as much. I hit a horrible but life-saving bottom. His sponsor introduced me to Al-Anon Primary Purpose. They worked the steps using the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, like my first sponsor. We decided we would both work the steps this way and see what happened. See if our relationship could survive. See if we could like each other. See if we could be friends and really care about each other instead of treating each other like objects. I worked the 12 steps in a month. My transformation was dramatic. I could breathe again. I woke up to the reality of what had happened to my spiritual awakening. 20 years after AA began in 1955, it was estimated that 75% of the people who came to AA and really tried got sober. In Joe McHugh's book, Carry This Message, he stated in 2002, fewer than 5% of those who go to their first AA meeting get sober, a 70% drop in 47 years. Many of us who suffer from addiction have drifted away from the instructions the founders of the 12 steps wrote down for us, and many of us will die or want to die without that path. I'm one of those people. I have a spiritual malady which needs the spiritual solution found in the big book of AA. I'm sure you've all heard the frog story. If you put a frog into a pot of boiling water, it jumps out immediately. If you put a frog into a pot of cold water and gradually turn it up to boiling, the frog will stay in until it's cooked to death. Topic and discussion meetings almost cooked me to death. My meetings had lost their primary purpose. Tradition 5 says each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to the alcoholic, in my case, codependent, who still suffers. I desperately needed that purpose and didn't know it. We don't get better and then sponsor. We get and stay better through sponsorship, through carrying this message. Bill Wilson was led to immediately help another person like him in the next room while hospitalized for alcoholism. This was not like Bill Wilson. Later, after getting sober, when he had an urge to drink again, Bill Wilson instead looked for a church directory to find someone to help. This was not like Bill Wilson. That someone was Dr. Bob, who carried this message to 5,000 people with a spiritual malady like me. This was God intervening in human affairs to save our collective bacon, to save me, to save you. All Bill Wilson wanted was to be a great golfer and have the tan of the well-to-do. God had bigger plans for him, and God has bigger plans for me and you. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. That's in the foreword to the first edition. Not to show Tina how we have recovered, to show Tina, to show others. Helping and giving is our salvation. I am not an expert, but I think that was what Jesus meant when he said, "Feed my sheep." It's not for the sheep, but for the feeder of the sheep. Not to get fed, the action of trying to feed. That is how we get fed. Trying to help is how we get help. I started a local and then virtual primary purpose meeting for family and friends of sex addicts and started sponsoring. I found my purpose again: give. The two verbs, actions in the 12th step. 1, try to carry this message to others like me. 2, practice these principles in all of our affairs. I've been trying and practicing since. I started having chronic physical pain. For a couple of years, we went everywhere trying to find out what was causing my pain, even the Cleveland Clinic, with no luck. I was in pain at the level of 8, 9, and 10 every moment and couldn't stand it any longer. and every pain med I was given caused worse problems. I became addicted to clonazepam and many other medications. Getting off was a nightmare. I wanted my life, loved my children and grandchildren, but I just could not continue in that kind of pain. Dave was a daily witness to this excruciating experience, so when I asked him to help me find a way to end my life, he lovingly agreed. I searched the internet one more time and found a woman in Canada who described my situation exactly. She said she had fibromyalgia. She listed an MD in San Francisco who offered a free virtual consultation. Dr. Congdon diagnosed me with the disease, then confirmed it weeks later when we traveled to see her. She prescribed Dr. Saint Amon's guaifenesin protocol. I hadn't heard of it because guaifenesin is an over-the-counter expectorant, and no drug companies were making any money off of it. Dr. Saint Amon describes it this way. Too often, physician and patient focus on symptoms and fail to perceive the much larger problem. Dead-end diagnoses result in the treatment of symptoms, which is only partially effective, and at the same time ignores the underlying cause and the disease that continues to worsen over time. It must be said that at this time, if there is a commonly accepted treatment protocol, it is polypharmacy, heaping medications upon medications and adding more to combat side effects. For many patients, this is simply an unacceptable life sentence. Sounds like alcoholism and codependency, doesn't it? I had another misunderstood illness. But again, God directed me to the solution. I started the protocol. It makes you feel worse before you slowly start to get better. To survive this pain of getting better, I had to focus on the spiritual realm. I followed the instructions in the Big Book on page 87. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we have been discussing. There are many helpful books also. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one's priest, minister, or rabbi. If those of us with a spiritual malady focus on any problem, including pain, it grows. We have to focus on solution. It was my only chance, my only hope. My life depended on it. I'm not religious, don't attend church, so I researched the books the founders of the 12 Steps studied. They were my priests, ministers, rabbis. I learned that after the early AA meetings in New York, members would frequently adjourn to Steinway Hall to listen to Emmett Fox lecture. I had also heard early AA member Chuck Chamberlain talk about Emmett Fox and his booklets. His golden key instructs, all that you have to do is this: stop thinking about the difficulty, in my case, horrible physical pain, whatever it is, and think about God instead. This is the complete rule. And if only you will do this, the trouble, whatever it is, will presently disappear. It makes no difference what kind of trouble it is. It may be a big thing or a little thing. It may concern health, finance, a lawsuit, a quarrel, an accident, or anything else conceivable. But whatever it is, just stop thinking about it and think of God instead. That is all you have to do. But I didn't yet have a belief in God. So I looked for more help from Emmett Fox and found his booklet, The Yoga of Love. Moment by moment, day by day, week by week, I shall root out from my own heart every condemnation of my brother, no matter who or where he may be, or what he may have done, every atom of resentment for any unkindness or injustice that has ever been shown to me. or to one that I love. Every particle of jealousy of others, however cleverly it may be disguising itself. Every smallest thought or feeling, in short, which is not an expression of divine love. My own heart is to be my workshop, my laboratory, my great enterprise, and contribution to humanity. I had been focusing on and trying to fix my pain, and it was just getting worse. I was dying. My only hope was to try this spiritual solution. I understood the instruction in the big book like this. Instead of focusing on problem, we exclusively focus on solution. We live in give, love, and contribute. Higher power solves our perceived problems. It's a 12-step spiritual program of action. This ball of yarn analogy helps me. Imagine a tabletop full of green balls of yarn, overflowing with green balls of yarn. See them in your mind's eye. We'll call these green balls of yarn problem. The human solution is to focus on these green balls of yarn. We talk about them, think about them, analyze them, study them, research them, cry about them, fight about them, dissect them, etc. And after expending all that energy, we end up with more green balls of yarn, more problem, desperation, loneliness, despair. Now visualize a huge basket at your feet full of purple balls of yarn. We will call those purple balls of yarn solution. The spiritual solution is to simply pick up those purple balls of yarn, take the daily actions of steps 10, 11, 12, and live and give, and set one on the table. We place more and more purple balls of yarn on the table. As we live this way, the green balls of yarn are pushed off. We practice focusing exclusively on the purple balls of yarn, solution, and setting them on the table, and still more green balls of yarn, problem, fall off. On and on we go until our lives, the table, are full of solution. Higher power solves our perceived problems. On the title page of the Big Book of AA, it says this: the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. For me, codependency. For 20 years in my early recovery, I had never seen or even heard the word recovered in the rooms that I went to for recovery. I had only heard recovering, struggling. It was up to me to try harder, work harder, think harder. When my new sponsor used the word recovered, it sounded like she was bragging, but it also intrigued me and gave me a bit of hope. It dawned on me there might be something I had misunderstood about recovery. Again, on page 27, once in a while, alcoholics, and I'll add codependents, have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. We have free will. I could continue to focus on and rehearse old ideas, emotions, and attitudes, and struggle, or I could choose to cast them aside and live by a new set of conceptions and motives. In a nutshell, on page 128, giving rather than getting will become the guiding principle. We're not cured. We can always go back to our old ideas, emotions, and attitudes, and living in get and struggle anytime we choose. We stay recovered by completely giving ourselves to this simple program of action. We make a choice each moment. It is an inside job for all of us. And from the 12 and 12 on page 174, great suffering and great love are AAs, and I'll add, and CODAs, disciplinarians. We need no others. Every time I live and get, it hurts. I learn. I'm disciplined. Every time I live and give, it's great. I learn. I'm disciplined. The 12 steps in sponsorship became my first higher power. The 12 steps are a spiritual program of positive, constructive action, a kit of simple tools. Living and Give has simplified my life and removed my crippling anxiety. My sponsor pointed out the third step bargain on page 63. Higher power has one job: to provide everything I need. Sound familiar? Just like me and my kids. Needs, not wants. I have two jobs. One, stay close to God, and two, perform His work well. At the time, I said it like this: stay close to love and perform love's work well. She asked if I was willing to make those two jobs the purpose of the rest of my life. I didn't know how, but I was certainly willing, and that's all that's required. The big book says if anything is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. So I walked through my fear, my self-doubt, self-loathing, and self-consciousness, and self-obsession, and sponsored and sponsored and sponsored. And by doing so, I was inadvertently practicing loving and giving, which is how we experience God. Now I was learning how to love everyone, not just my children. My own heart had become my workshop and my laboratory. My pain continues to slowly improve as the protocol reverses my physical disease and the phosphates I've been storing since birth gradually leave my body, and the 12 steps reverse my spiritual disease. I also stumbled across another Emmett Fox booklet and found these words: see God where the trouble seems to be. See God in my pain, in my disease, in my problem. That sounded nuts. But that is exactly the message of the big book. We help those with whom we share the problem. All problems, or at least those we want to improve. Only 20% of those with fibromyalgia are low dosers, fast responders like me. That means we get better faster, but the process is more intensely painful. Yikes. Again, see God where the trouble seems to be. I had to seek to help those with whom I shared this problem. Just like with my Al-Anonism, love addiction, codependency, I seek to help others like me. I started a Facebook support group for low dosers, fast responders on the Guaifenesin protocol. If you have a spiritual malady like me, this is our solution: helping others like us. Everywhere we need help, we turn to help. It's a design for living that works in rough going, from page 15. In my experience, codependency underlies all addiction. It is the very definition of the mental states that precede a relapse. The 12 steps transform all of our affairs because the only help God provides is perfect help. He leaves no stone unturned. Sandy Beach is a recovered alcoholic. He's now deceased. Told a story about a little boy with a toothache. and his toothache kept growing worse and worse all night. He knew if he'd called for his mom, she would bring him 2 aspirin and a glass of water. But he didn't. He just laid in bed, getting worse and worse all night. He got no sleep. He played horribly in his baseball game the next day. They lost. And Sandy says, "What was wrong with that kid? Why didn't he call for his mom?" He didn't call for his mom because he knew his mom. And his mom would call his dentist. And he knew his dentist. And his dentist wouldn't just look at that tooth. He'd set 3 appointments, look at all of his teeth, and he'd end up with 3 fillings. And all he wanted was 2 aspirin and a glass of water. Perfect help is what we get in the 12 steps, practicing these principles in all of our affairs. We take inventory. It's a fact-finding, fact-facing process. It's an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. From page 64. Step 4 through 10 teach me about spiritual law. It's like the law of gravity. If I walk off a roof, I splat on the ground. It just is. It isn't personal. In spiritual law, we learn we don't get what we say we want. We get what we are. These steps show us who we are. Every relationship, situation, and interaction is an opportunity to practice recovered. As a codependent, I wasted so much of my life focusing on others and what they were doing. These steps change all of that. In fact, on page 66, it is called The Key to the Future, and it describes our course. We go from seeing others as bad to seeing others as spiritually sick. And we look for how we too have acted out of our sickness and suffering. We are the same. I also found Emmett Fox's comments on the first 2 words of the Lord's Prayer very helpful. Our Father. It first defines the character of God as that of the perfect father dealing with his children. And the offspring is and must be of the same nature as the parent. And so, since God is divine spirit, man must essentially be divine spirit too, whatever appearances may say to the contrary. God exists, and the eternal, all-powerful, all-present God is the loving Father of mankind. Next, we see the prayer says, not my Father, but our Father. And this indicates, beyond the possibility of mistake, the truth of the brotherhood of man. It forces upon our attention at the very beginning the fact that all men are indeed brethren, the children of one Father, and that there is neither Jew nor Greek, neither bond nor free, neither chose or not or unchosen, because all men are brethren. It ends all the tiresome nonsense about the spiritual superiority of one group of human beings over any other group. He cuts away the illusion that the members of any nation or race or territory or group or class or gender or color are in the sight of God superior to any other group. On the spiritual path, it makes no difference, whatever, to what group he belongs or does not belong. We find we can't quit our addiction and codependency, but we can turn and act from what higher power would have us be and do each 24 hours. These become our new ideals. Ideals like I'm good, I'm smart, I'm beautiful, and so is everyone else. Sometimes we just don't act like it, but it is still the underlying truth. Even that man who raped me, he was blocked from the truth about himself. We practice acting from the truth. We model being intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation. That is the role higher power has assigned us all. So how do I practice the truth today? If I say I want kindness, I practice being kind. If I say I want compassion, I practice being compassionate. If I say I want honesty, I practice being honest. If I say I want emotional intimacy, I practice into me see, being visible. If I say I want partnership, I practice being a partner, working shoulder to shoulder on our common goals, big and small, inside and out. If I say I want equality, I show up as equal, not more or less. If I say I want to be close to anyone, I practice close, initiating contact and being real instead of managing my image. If I say I want affection, I practice expressing it. I ask my higher power to help me be the change I want to see in my life. We have not once sought to be one in a family, to be a friend among friends, to be a worker among workers, to be a useful member of society. Always we tried to struggle to the top of the heap or to hide underneath it. This self-centered behavior blocked a partnership relation with any one of those about us, from page 53 on the 12 and 12. So I practice by being a visible member in my fellowships instead of competing, comparing, gossiping, or other extreme of hiding. I collaborate, I show up, and participate in our common goal, carrying this message. A couple of years ago, Dave and I felt inspired to start a meeting for all, like the founders wrote about in the chapter A Vision for You on page 161. Many an alcoholic who entered there came away with the answer. He succumbed to that gay crowd inside who laughed at their own misfortunes and understood his. He and his wife would leave elated by the thought of what they could now do for some stricken acquaintance and his family. They knew they had a host of new friends. It seemed they had known these strangers always. Here we are learning we are all the same, no matter what our symptoms. This revised quote from William Blake sums up my understanding of our 12-step solution. I sought my God, and my God I couldn't see. I sought my soul, and my soul eluded me. I sought to serve my brother, and I'll add sister, and I found all three. As we do, we get and keep ourselves in God's hands and experience the promises on page 100. Both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstance. You will find recovered codependents of every stripe here at our meeting. Alcoholics, drug addicts, sex addicts, love addicts, Al-Anons, S-Anons, COSAs, debtors, CLs, CAs, CLAs, food addicts, OAs, NAs, etc. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Join us. We are happy to help.
Thank you, Tina. You have an amazing story of recovering mentally and physically as you recovered spiritually. That's awesome. I have a practical question about those purple balls of yarn when I was listening to you. It sounds like when you're disturbed, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain, or whatever the disturbance is, that you turn. Could you just describe to me the first one or two or three things that you do when you're disturbed?
Well, I quickly try to turn to be helpful and useful. Sometimes I text people, reach out to them, tell them I'm thinking about them, just get out of myself. If it sticks at all, if the disturbance sticks around, I have to do a 10th step as clearly described in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and share that with another recovered person. And in part of that process is finding what my old ideas are. And that's usually the root of the disturbance. And then at that point, I can, get clear on, okay, what's the new ideal? What's the positive opposite of that thing? And then turn to act from that instead.
Thank you. And I have one other question for you, and that is, you pointed out the meetings that are available. Your home group is on Wednesdays and Sundays at primarypurposebigbookstudy.com. I know the meeting links can be found there. Is there anything that I would need to bring or be ready for in order to attend that meeting?
Well, if you have the Big Book of AA, you could bring that, but you can also find that on the internet. So just yourself and not anything else that I can think of. And we have another person on this podcast, Kathleen. Kathleen, do you have any questions or comments?
Hi. Thank you so much. What a great story, and I don't know, so thorough about how recovery can happen, and how recovery works. I guess one of the questions I have is about your relationship with your higher power. And I'm wondering, sometimes people in recovery, when they work the steps, and, Bill Wilson had this white light experience where, he just felt better. And it talks about in the Big Book, feeling better, right at step 6. And I'm just wondering how you hear, or if you can help us to learn more about how to hear our higher power's guidance. And if we don't hear it, what do we do? We're so used to doing things our way. And if we're not going to be the director anymore, how do we trust and let go and know what our higher power wants for us?
Thanks for that question. So I did not have a bright light burning bush experience like Bill Wilson had. I have had a spiritual awakening of the garden variety. It happened slowly and gradually. And in the beginning, just turning to sponsor and help others, it didn't really get me connected to my higher power in one sense, but it did get me connected to this flow of love that, one of the things I realize in the 5th step promises, it says, we used to have a spiritual understanding of God, something like this, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience of God. And just carrying the message to others who are suffering was that experience for me for quite a while. And then gradually, I started using the instructions on page 86 and 87 on the 11th step. So most mornings, I take time. I'm either working with a protege, someone I'm sponsoring. And if I'm not working with a protege, I go through that meditation. And the way that I do mine is I start with the third step prayer. And I love the third step prayer because it says, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with thee as thou will. So right away, it sets the tone that my job is to put myself in God's hands and be and do what God would have me be. And what it says on page 86 is, on awakening, we think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. So that was super helpful. And I think that's why my anxiety diminished so much, is I was always in either the future or the past, or I was pretending that I knew what other people were thinking. I was in other people's head, making up stories. And so just staying in the 24 hours, starting with the third step prayer. And then the next step for me was to ask God to direct my thinking, like it says, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. For me, self-pity feels a lot like self-obsession and self-loathing and shame. And I used to feel like I didn't have any choice in that. But what I realized is it had become a habit. I had just continued to rehearse and rehearse those things. And this was giving me something to do instead. So that was the self-pity part. The dishonest part was the part where I was making up a story about either what other people were thinking or going to do, or what was going to go on tomorrow, or I was in the past. That's all dishonest. And then self-seeking is the biggest thing. And that's when I'm looking to get something, when I'm back in get instead of give. So I noticed that. I now know what self-seeking looks like. It's like, I want you to like me. If I do this, I want you to like me. If I don't do this, I want you to like me. So now it's no longer about being liked. It's about being directed by my higher power, and being and doing that. And then the next section here, it says, in thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask God for inspiration and intuitive thought or decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. So my next part of my written meditation is I just jot down the things that I have on my schedule to do that day. And particularly, I jot down the things that I don't quite know how to handle. And what it tells me to do is to ask for inspiration and intuitive thought or decision about those things. Then it says we relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. So if I'm back in struggle, I'm back in Tina's will and Tina's power, and that's going to go poorly for me, reliably. So I do the things I know how to do in the 24 hours, and I turn the rest over to my higher power. And I completely trust that my higher power will give me an intuitive thought, an inspiration, if I'm supposed to be acting on that and when I'm supposed to be acting on that. And then I end it, and then I used to spend some time reading some spiritual literature. I can still do that. I pull out my Emmett Fox or whatever. And then I conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that I be shown, like it says on 87, be shown all through the day what my next step is to be, and that I be given whatever I need to take care of problems. It's then it says, as we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we're no longer running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, thy will be done. So I end my writing meditation with thank you for guiding me, and Please show me what I can do today for the person who still suffers. Then I add a phrase that I got from Emmett Fox, which is all is well, because it's really important for me to practice believing in good instead of believing in bad, believing in a good God, and believing that even things that look bad from my small perspective are, like my pain, for example, can be used for good. It's like I'm actually now I know that my pain is the pain of getting better, so I can look at it differently. And I also know that sometimes when I have relationships that are strained with people that I love, I can look at it differently, and I can look at it from the perspective as God knows what we need. We're probably all being changed by this experience in ways that are going to be good for us all. And then I finish with the 7th step prayer. My Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. And I love that because it reminds me that God can use me good and bad. Bill Wilson was not a perfect person, clearly. He went on to have an affair, but God used him in such a way that we have this big book and it has helped thousands. God can use me good and bad. And then I pray that the defects will be removed so that I can, be helpful for that day. So that practice helps me stay in connection with God. And then the sponsorship piece helps me stay connected. So pretty much every morning I'm either doing that practice or I'm working with others on, one of the steps.
Thanks for that great question, Kathleen and Tina, for your detailed response on your experience with listening to your higher power. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this podcast. Want to remind everybody that you can join a 12-step meeting for anyone and everyone who is interested in a spiritual way of life. And that is for anyone and everyone who has experienced addiction in any aspect of their life. The website again, www.primarypurposebigbookstudy, all one word, .com. And there you can see background and click links to get into the meetings on Wednesday evening and Sunday midday. Tina, thanks so much for your story, and I hope everyone has a great day and a great evening.
And I'll just say one more thing. If you want to quit being miserable and can't, we are happy to help.